Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we've got a stack of sources on what is probably one of the most consequential policy decisions of the decade.
It really is.
We're talking about the huge debate over whether the core DNA of these frontier AI models, the weights, the training code, should just be released openly to the public.
And it's this ultimate tension, right? On one side, you have this promise of an explosion of innovation, competition, just, democratizing the whole field.
Which could be amazing for the global economy.
Absolutely. But then on the other side, there's this very stark, very hard to quantify fear of misuse, of catastrophic harm, of putting, weapons or incredibly powerful tools into the hands of bad actors.
That's the conflict right there. So our mission today is to cut through all the noise, all the rhetoric, and really illuminate the complexities, the trade-offs, and, what these decisions actually hinge on. Because for you, this isn't just some academic discussion. The choice that's made here is going to determine the pace, the safety, and the economic distribution of what might be the most powerful technology humanity has ever created.
It's a big one.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have two incredibly strong, very passionate camps here. But what's really fascinating to me is the bedrock of agreement they actually share. Before we get into the fight, what are the things that even the fiercest opponents actually nod their heads to?
Well, what's so interesting is how much common ground there is before they, diverge on what to do about it.
Right.
Both sides will concede unequivocally that transparency and competition are valuable. They foster innovation. These are good things, good goals for society.
That makes sense. Innovation itself is not the enemy here.
Exactly. And maybe more importantly, they both agree that releasing the code and the model weights. It entails misuse risks. There's no debate on that. They just have profoundly different ideas about how big that risk is.
And how well we can manage it.
And how well we can manage it, yes.
And they admit they don't have a crystal ball, which is, I think, a key concession in any of these high-tech debates.
Totally. There is genuine shared uncertainty about where AI capabilities are even headed, let alone how to quantify the benefits and the harms. I mean, they're arguing over these expected value calculations based on probabilities they can't actually measure.
And you can't ignore history. I mean, open source has such a long, proven track record.
It's undisputed. Open source principles have been this engine for just massive economic value in other fields.
Yeah.
Think about Linux, disrupting proprietary software.
Or the Human Genome Project.
The Human Genome Project, GPS, that whole success story is undisputed. And that's why the proponents of openness feel so confident.
And finally, they both seem to get that this isn't just a simple yes or no choice.
Yes, the consensus on intermediate solutions is really revealing. Things like structured access or restricted API use, maybe mandatory third-party audits.
Things that could get you most of the benefits.
Exactly. They could potentially capture a lot of the innovation benefits without the full public release. Just recognizing that a middle path exists, it sort of tempers the whole debate.
Perfect. With that consensus laid out, let's just jump headfirst into the case for openness. The pro-advocates say full public release isn't just a nice idea, it's an economic necessity to stop power from concentrating. They say it lowers barriers to entry, it democratizes access, and it keeps a few dominant firms from, running the whole show.
This is their anti-monopoly argument. And they point to history. Look at proprietary database vendors like Oracle. They were massively disrupted by open source solutions.
MySQL, PostgreSQL.
Right. When you remove that technical barrier, you empower thousands of smaller, more agile competitors to jump in.
And the economic projections are just... They're staggering. Your sources are projecting that OpenAI could increase global GDP by 0.5% to 1%.
Annually.
By 2030, just by not duplicating R&D.
That's not marginal growth. I mean, that is trillions of dollars of new wealth. If you think about what a single percentage point of global GDP means, it's the difference between stagnation and real transformative prosperity.
And it speaks to this idea of efficiency from collective intelligence.
Exactly. Open access accelerates technical advancement because you have researchers all over the world scrutinizing it, not just an internal team of 100 people. Right. There was a 2022 study in the sources that found when communities get access to the code, bug resolution time was cut by a whopping 40% compared to closed projects.
40%. So it's faster, safer iteration for everyone.
For everyone. And those cost savings, they translate directly into economic activity. Everyone talks about the Hugging Face Transformers library.
Oh, yeah.
That open repository, it's been downloaded over 100 million times. It's estimated to have saved developers globally something like $500 million in compute costs alone.
$500 million.
It's the network effect of reuse.
Mm.
It's exactly what happened with the Human Genome Project. Once that data went public, tool development just exploded. The cost of sequencing a genome plummeted from $100 million in 2001 to under 1,000 by 201.
So public release wasn't just a nice to have, it was a radical economic accelerator.
Absolutely.
And that speed, that reduced costs, it leads to all these scalable derivative technologies. The IMF project's Open AI could boost productivity growth by 0.7% a year through 2035.
And this is where the GPS analogy is so powerful. Before GPS was fully opened up for civilian use, its economic value was maybe, what, $1 billion in 1990?
Not much in the grand scheme.
But after opening it up for logistics apps, for farming, for everything, that value scaled to over $100 billion annually by 2020. Openness just spurs new applications that the original developers could never have even imagined.
The economic case is stunning, but that success leads right to the core anxiety. If the upsides are that massive, the potential downsides must be just as potent.
What are the con advocates really focused on? They're focused not on the average outcome, but on the tail risks, the catastrophic possibilities. Their core argument is what they call the asymmetry of harm.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, the benefits, like we just said, are diffuse. They're incremental, they're realized over time. But the harms, they are concentrated, they can be catastrophic, and potentially irreversible in a single moment.
That's the classic economic externality where the costs are pushed onto society.
Precisely. Open release effectively socializes catastrophic risks while the benefits are privatized, or at least spread out. The companies releasing the models, they don't have to pay the full cost of a potential misuse.
Society does.
Society does. The Rand Corporation, for example, estimated that a single successful AI-enabled cyber attack on critical infrastructure could cause $50 to $250 billion in damage.
And the financial sector is clearly paying attention to these numbers.
Oh, absolutely. Lloyd's of London projected that AI-related liability claims, everything from deepfake fraud to system failures, could hit $30 billion annually by 2030. That's a huge transfer of risk onto the insurance market, and then, eventually onto all of us.
The con advocates are basically saying that's irresponsible governance.
Yes, that it's unpriced, externalized risk.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me, because the con side also attacks the core premise of openness itself. Wow. This idea of democratization. They argue releasing the weights doesn't actually solve the real competition problems.
Right. They punch a hole right through that argument by pointing to the fundamental bottlenecks,
which are compute and data.
Compute and data.
So if I can use an analogy here, it's like you're giving me the recipe book, the weights, and the code. But I still don't have the industrial kitchen, the compute, or the ingredients, the proprietary data.
That is the perfect analogy. You can have the blueprints for GPT-4, but to train a model that's actually comparable, you're looking at $50 to $100 million in compute costs.
A massive capital barrier.
Huge. And beyond that, 90% of the really valuable frontier training data is still proprietary or restricted. So the code helps with fine-tuning, but it doesn't democratize frontier competition.
And releasing the code also immediately jacks up security costs for everyone else.
It does. It fundamentally shifts the security burden downstream. You're forcing every platform, every user, every company to play this constant, expensive game of defense. We saw this very clearly with the MetaLlama weights leak back in March 2023.
And the cost of that was immediate.
Oh, yeah. That leak led to a rapid proliferation of uncensored model variants all over the internet. Platforms had to react instantly. Discord, for one, reported spending an extra $15 million on content moderation in just one quarter.
Just one quarter.
And that was partly attributed to just dealing with the flood of AI-generated harmful content from that open model.
But wait a second. If the pro argument says that same leak saved developers $500 million in compute, why should we care about Discord spending $15 million on moderation? I mean, doesn't the huge benefit just outweigh that cost?
That is the ultimate trade-off calculation, isn't it? The con advocates would argue that the $500 million saving is diffuse, spread out, while that $15 million is just the visible tip of the iceberg of all the security costs society now has to bear.
And it doesn't even factor in the potential $50 billion cyber attack.
Right. They see that security expense as this continuous compounding societal debt.
And then finally, the ultimate point of caution, irreversibility.
The no undo button. Once the weights are public, you can't get them back. Given how uncertain we are about where AI is going, if we discover in 6 months that an open model enables some unanticipated mass-scale harm, I don't know, designing novel bioagents or something,
You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
there's no clawback mechanism. And the con side uses this irreversibility as the definitive reason to just, preserve our options through controlled access.
Okay, this brings us to what I think is the most illuminating part of this whole debate. The critical concessions made by both sides. These are the hinges where the policy trade-offs really become clear.
Absolutely. The people arguing for full openness, they had to admit something crucial. They conceded that intermediate solutions, things like structured access APIs, might capture somewhere between 60 to 80% of the innovation benefits.
Wait. So the champions of full openness basically admitted that controlled access is up to 80% as good.
With substantially lower risk exposure, yes.
That completely changes the risk calculus. If you can get 80% of the upside for a fraction of the catastrophic risk, why would you push so hard for that last 20%?
That is the policy dilemma. That final 20% is where the pure, unconstrained democratization is. The ability for anyone, anywhere, to modify the model without oversight. But yes, if 80% of the economic gain is achievable safely, it really tempers the case for full public release.
But the caution advocates, they made a big concession too, right?
They did. The champion of precaution admitted that if the probability of that catastrophic misuse, that tail risk, was proven to be extremely low, say less than 0.1%,
Okay.
the entire expected value calculation would shift substantially toward openness. Their entire argument hinges on that risk being higher than some tiny threshold, a risk they can't actually quantify.
So the whole choice rests on this shared, unmeasured guess of a tiny probability, which makes that issue of irreversibility, which seemed like a clear win for the con side, a lot murkier.
It creates this philosophical clash over what an irreversible loss even is. You have two totally conflicting views. The con view is simple. Foregone innovation is recoverable. We can always release the weights later when we feel safer. But the harms from a release are irrevocable. Once a bad actor has the code, it's out there forever.
And the pro view just flips that completely.
It flips it on its head. They argue that withholding release is the irreversible loss. They say delaying it irreversibly forfeits all that compounding distributed innovation, and you risk entrenching the dominance of the big players.
So if you wait, the big companies just lock in their position, and releasing it later is pointless for competition.
Exactly. Both sides claim the other's policy leads to a permanent, unrecoverable loss.
That's a profound divide. Let's look at one final trade-off: managing risks through liability. The con side's big argument was the negative externality, that releasers aren't on the hook for the harms.
And the con advocate admitted that if you put adaptive liability frameworks in place, specifically imposing strict liability on releasers for foreseeable misuses, that it would significantly weaken the externality argument.
Because the risk is internalized.
Exactly. If a company faced massive financial penalties because their open model was misused, well, the market failure argument starts to fall apart.
But those strict liability frameworks are just theoretical right now. They don't exist in any major jurisdiction.
That's the huge practical hurdle. So right now, any company releasing weights gets a regulatory free pass, and the public bears the risk.
And the Llama leak also showed that diffusion happens even when you try to control access.
Right, which raises this really important question. If leaks are almost inevitable, is control access just offering us illusory security? Are we sacrificing immense innovation for a thin layer of safety that's just going to fail anyway when the stakes are highest?
Wow. This deep dive has really shown that the solution hinges entirely on your perspective, on your appetite for risk. So what's the final synthesis we should take away?
I think your judgment on this really comes down to three things. First, your personal estimate of that catastrophic misuse probability. Is that tail risk high enough to justify stopping this incredible economic engine?
Second, your assessment of whether those intermediate solutions, the structured access models, are really sufficient to get the innovation we need. And third, what's your philosophical default when you're facing this much uncertainty? Is it precaution, which favors the con argument, or is it accelerating progress, which favors the pro side?
So what does this all mean? The whole debate seems to assume that current AI capabilities are the ceiling for risk, but that the network effects of OpenAI will eventually create massive benefits. But if we achieve truly high-capability AI, we know that those network effects will amplify both the good and the bad exponentially and immediately. If the system is open, which network effect innovation or misuse is likely to dominate and cascade through society first? That answer will determine what today's decision really means for our near future. It's a provocative question to mull over as you explore these concepts of strict liability and intermediate access models further.